He followed a flicker in the dark, chasing bloodlines through ash and silence. What he found waiting didn't want to be rescued, it wanted to be known. They said no one ever came back from Shaft 9. So why did the stone still feel warm in his hand? The walls creaked like bones under strain. Somewhere deep beneath the surface of the earth, where the weight of time itself seemed to press down in layers of rock and soot, the mine groaned. Not the shudder of timber or wind through abandoned shafts, but something older. A sound with breath behind it. A wounded kind of exhale that rose from the stone like steam from a slit throat. Eli Granger stood motionless in the corridor, his boots half sunk in sludge and coal dust, one hand clenched around the iron loop of his lantern. The flame inside flickered uncertainly, casting a jittering halo on the tunnel walls. He hadn't moved in minutes, not since he'd seen it. A glow. Not from his lamp, not from any torch or fuse or carbide drip. It burned deep ahead past the last bend, where the tunnel curved downward and vanished into a lower chamber that wasn't on any map. It wasn't the color that chilled him, it was the rhythm. Before we descend any deeper into the mine and uncover what really became of the man who vanished, chasing a flame that shouldn't have burned, take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more of these buried stories to the surface. Every click helps keep the light on as we explore the darkest corners of forgotten history. It takes just a second, but it means the world to us. Thank you. The light didn't dance like fire. It pulsed. Like breath. Like thought. Then, motion. Just for a second, behind the flame, something shifted, not skittered, not scurried, moved, slow and deliberate, like it knew he was watching, like it wanted to be seen. Eli's breath stuttered in his chest. He raised the lantern, trying to catch another glimpse, but the glass had already begun to fog from the inside, as though the heat no longer wanted to leave. A drop of sweat ran from his temple to his jaw, slow as molasses. He didn't wipe it away. The silence was thick, not empty waiting. The mine had swallowed sound. Even the steady trickle of underground water had ceased. He could feel the pressure behind the stillness, like the whole earth had drawn in a breath and was holding it. The flame inside his lantern flared once, bright white, and then died. No warning, no sputter, just gone. Eli was blind now, not in the way surface folk meant. This was cave dark, black that pressed. Black that could make you forget the shape of yourself if you didn't clench your jaw and remember where your feet ended. He didn't move. Not yet. There was something alive in the stillness. He could feel it, hear it in the throb of his pulse, the wet slide of breath over stone, not his own. He dared not call out. Sound might make it real. Might tell it where he was. Or worse, might tell it he was ready. And then came the answer. Not a roar, not even a whisper, just a step, a sound like ash shifting, like something soft but heavy dragging across timber and bone. One step. Eli Granger inhaled sharp and thin. The fire was gone. The map was useless. He was too far down to run. Behind the darkness, something opened its eyes. And it had been waiting. The coin hit the table with a sound that didn't match its weight. Too light to buy luck, too loud to ignore. Eli Granger watched as the shopkeeper's hand hovered over it like a gambler over a loaded die. Behind them, the wind moaned through the weather-warped boards of Hollow's End's last general store, stirring the dust into idle spirals. Most miners came in for powder, rope, or a few tins of beans. Eli asked for a map. Ain't been printed since the fires, the old man warned, dragging a crumpled parchment from beneath the counter. Paths are half wrong, whole levels collapsed. Some say they change by themselves. Eli didn't look up. His eyes, pale and grainy like uncut quartz, were fixed on the faded lines. The town knew him mostly by silhouette. Quiet, tall, scarred just enough to mark him without making him memorable. He'd worked claims here a decade back, before the collapse, before his brother vanished somewhere below Shaft 9. That was the thing about these mines: if they took something from you, they didn't always kill it. They kept it. "This'll do," Eli said, sliding the coin forward. The shopkeeper made a sound, part pity, part amusement. "You know, some men head back into those shafts 'cause they hear voices. Others go 'cause they don't want to hear 'em anymore." Eli folded the map without answering. He walked out into the gray morning, where the fog hung low like a shroud left too long on the line. The town didn't watch him go, not really. They'd seen this before. He reached the tree line by mid-morning. The path was half swallowed by undergrowth, fence posts rotted to splinters, warning signs too faded to scare off ghosts. Beyond the ridge, the earth slouched downward into a collapsed mouth of stone and rusted rails, the mine's old entrance, like a throat that had forgotten how to swallow right. He stood at the lip for a while, one hand brushing the compass tied to his coat by a strip of leather. The needle twitched, then spun slow circles. "Useless. Figures," he muttered, then struck a match. The flame curled tight against the wind, illuminating his face in flashes: sharp cheekbones, a jagged scar along his jaw, and eyes that had spent too long looking where they weren't supposed to. He stepped forward. The tunnel breathed. The moment his boots left sunlight, the air changed cooler, thicker, almost damp with memory. He kept one hand on the wall, fingers skimming old pick marks and new scorch lines, like braille etched by panic. He passed a rusted cart, overturned and blanketed in ash. Farther in, someone had carved symbols into the stone. Not letters, not language, just warnings. Circles inside circles. Lines that veered toward the ceiling like they were fleeing something that climbed. Eli lit another match. Not for light, he had a lantern, but to feel the heat. To remind himself he was still flesh. He wasn't chasing gold. Gold was just the surface game. He was chasing a name, a voice, a promise he never got to keep. "Jacob," he whispered into the dark. And the mine, somehow, seemed to listen. The camp looked abandoned at first glance, just a scattering of mold-blistered canvas tents and rust-streaked cookware half buried in ash. Trees leaned in too close, like they didn't want to be seen near it. Even the birds kept their distance, their song thinning into silence the closer Eli drew. But the fire was still warm. Not lit, not blazing, just warm. Coals like bruised fruit, pulsing faintly in the heart of a stone ring blackened by use and disuse in equal measure. Eli crouched beside it, hand hovering just above the embers. No smoke, no fresh wood. But the heat was there, lingering, stubborn. "You ought to leave." The voice came from behind a felled log, thin and cracked like an old fence ready to snap. Eli stood slowly, not startled. Nothing had startled him in years. The boy was crouched low, knees tucked up under a frayed wool blanket, hair matted with what looked like soot and sap. His eyes were too wide for his face, too still for someone that young. "Didn't mean to scare you," Eli said. "You didn't." The boy's lips twitched, not in a smile, closer to a warning. "But she will." Eli glanced around. "You here alone?" The boy nodded, then shook his head. "Been alone since I left the tunnel. But I hear 'em. They don't scream anymore, though. That's how you know they belong to her now." Eli said nothing, just stood, hands loose at his sides. "She waits down there," the boy muttered, pulling the blanket tighter. "In the smoke, hair like firelight, walks without sound. No shadow, no breath." He said it like a prayer. Or a curse. Eli stepped forward, boots cracking twigs beneath the ash. "What's your name, son?" The boy blinked slow. "I don't remember. I gave it up to the dark. Names echo, and she hears echoes." Behind the boy, nailed into a sagging post, was a miner's tag. Brass. Half melted. The number etched on it looked familiar. Eli's stomach tightened, but he said nothing. He knew better than to ask questions. This place wasn't ready to answer. She let me go 'cause I looked away, the boy whispered. Didn't stare into the fire, that's what pulls you. Makes you see things, makes you want to stay. Eli crouched again, pulling the old map from his coat pocket. It trembled in the wind, even though the trees were still. The shaft he needed was nearby, shaft 9, the one they sealed with dynamite after the fire. The boy's eyes followed the map, but never moved from the ember pit. You going anyway? He asked. I am. Then take this, the boy said, pulling a length of red cloth from beneath the blanket. It was stiff with dried, something sap, blood, both. She don't cross it, not unless you call her name. Eli took it, tied it to his wrist. The boy stood then, without a sound, and disappeared into the woods like a gust that never touched the trees. Eli didn't look back. He'd already heard enough ghost stories. He just didn't expect one to offer him help. He turned toward the mine, toward the place where smoke had a heartbeat, and descended. The deeper Eli went, the louder his breath seemed to grow. Every exhale scraped against the stone, like it had claws. His boots found gravel that had no right to crunch, damp with something that wasn't quite water. The tunnel pressed in close behind him, and ahead, it slouched into angles that didn't match the map. Time didn't move the same down here, neither did light. He turned down a narrow offshoot, barely more than a fissure, following the itch behind his ears that whispered left. The lantern flickered. Its flame had taken on a strange blue cast, no longer bright but sullen, like it was thinking too much. The silence down here wasn't empty. It was memory made thick, full of breath not taken and names not spoken. The walls held onto sound like a mourner with a keepsake. Every scrape, every step came back seconds later, thinner and off-key, like something behind him was rehearsing his movements. 100 yards in, the passage widened into a pocket chamber hollowed out by hand and time. And there, in the rock face, carved deep into a slab of bloodstone dark as old wine, were 2 letters, J.G. Eli's lantern stilled. His hand, too. The edges of the carving were jagged and shallow, as if scraped by bone or dull metal. No miner's mark, no symmetry, just raw insistence. Jacob Granger. His brother had been here. Alone or not, he didn't know yet. He let his fingers touch the groove. It felt warm. A sudden scuff echoed behind him. He spun, lantern raised, catching only dust settling in the space he'd just passed. No breath, no movement. Just the sense of something that had almost been there, as if the mine had considered showing its face and changed its mind. Further in, something white lay half buried under a film of soot. Eli knelt. It was a child's shoe. Worn, the sole coming apart at the seam. No blood. Just dirt, and time, and something that looked like soot beneath the laces but smelled of ash. He turned it over in his palm once before setting it down. Some things weren't meant to leave the ground. He stood and the lantern's light swung wide across the far side of the chamber, catching a perfect circle of ash. Charcoal and soot laid out like ritual, the center scraped clean. No footprints. Just a stillness inside the ring that made the hairs rise on his neck. He didn't step in. Something in him refused. Not fear, not quite. Respect, maybe. Recognition. It reminded him of graveyards in winter untouched, waiting for spring to melt the ground and reveal what hadn't stayed buried. A soft crunch again. Closer this time. Eli turned in place, slow. The air didn't move, but the sound had been real. He listened not for footsteps, but for breath. Nothing came. And yet, the flame dimmed. He was being watched. Not from behind, not from above. From below. The floor felt thinner now, like there was a hollow space just beneath his boots, holding its breath. A place where names went to wait, and eyes had no lids to blink. He gripped the lantern tighter and stepped forward. Not because he was ready, because something wanted him to. The tunnel ended in a mouthful of ruin. Collapsed beams jutted from the rock like snapped ribs, wood blackened and warped by fire, long cooled but never forgotten. Ash blanketed everything soft and fine, like snowfall no one had asked for. The air here was different, not stale, but smothered, like the breath of something sleeping just beneath the rubble, warm and patient. Eli crouched low, sweeping aside soot with the back of his glove. The old timbers had been reinforced with wire mesh once, now twisted into strange, almost vine-like shapes. Fire did that. It reshaped things into versions of themselves that didn't quite remember what they used to be. He spotted a glint beneath the wreckage, a corner of metal wedged between two stones. He pulled carefully, prying loose a small, iron-bound book charred at the edges. The leather cover bubbled and blackened. A miner's log, by the look of it. Pages curled inward like dry leaves, ink smeared into bruises where water and heat had fought for ownership. But some of the words still held. He flipped gently through what remained, the writing shaking from page to page. Simple records at first measurements, dates, depth charts, or yields. The mundane language of men trying to turn the earth into coin. Then the tone changed. One entry bled through the char, written in heavier ink, as if the hand that scrawled it had pressed hard enough to remember. Smoke started coming through the vents again. Third day in a row, not black this time, white-blue. Like breath in winter, no heat, no sound, just there. The next page was half burned, the corner missing, but he made out a few lines. They stopped sending food to the lower shafts, said it was a mistake. No one believes that. Everyone hears it now, singing, real low, like a lullaby trying to keep the rocks asleep. Another turn, more damage. The words choked up against the fire's bite. Then one final entry, etched into the inside cover. The handwriting was different, slanted, rushed, almost carved. They sealed her in, claimed it was mercy, but mercy don't knock at night. Eli closed the book. The hinge let out a sigh as the covers came together, like it had been waiting a long time to rest. He sat for a moment, letting the silence fill in the blanks. The ledger didn't tell him who she was. Not exactly. But it proved something had been sealed in this shaft, and not by accident, not by collapse. On purpose, chosen. The kind of choice men made when they were afraid of what they'd created. He slipped the book into his coat, feeling its weight settle near his chest. There was no breeze, and yet the ash around him swirled in a slow circle, as if stirred by something not quite wind. Behind him, the faintest sound, a knock. 3 slow taps, not wood on wood, not rock on metal. Knuckle on stone. Deliberate. Eli didn't turn. He just stood and kept walking. Because whatever was buried down here had a story. And now, he had proof that it was still telling it. The fire started with a breath. That's how they described it later, like the mine had exhaled, and the air itself turned against them. It was 20 years ago. No one talked much about the Hollow's End fire now, except in mutters over whiskey or in half-choked warnings to green hands. Officially, it was called a containment incident. Unofficially, it was a grave sealed by excuses. 17 workers had been sent into Shaft 9 that day. 11 came out. The rest were ghosts. It began in the lower tunnels. A fault line nobody noticed, or chose not to. A spark from a damaged carbide lamp, gas pockets that had built up for weeks. When the blast came, it folded part of the shaft like paper and sealed the only known exit in a bloom of flame and stone. Panic does strange things to men in the dark. Some screamed, some went silent. Others clawed at the rubble until their fingers bled raw. But one woman, a foreman named Althea Keene, held the line. She wasn't big, not in frame, but her voice had the kind of weight that cut through smoke. She called each man by name, checked their injuries, and when someone started to slip, she sat with them. Slapped sense back into them. Or sang. She knew the tunnels better than most. Born in the hills, raised in coal camps. The mine was less a workplace to her than a second spine. While others prayed for rescue, she took inventory, mapped air currents, listened. And when the upper team managed to breach a ventilation shaft, barely wide enough for one, she ordered the worst injured up first. She tied belts together to make a harness, lifted 3 men herself, then 2 more, her own lungs burning, hair scorched at the ends. When they came back for her, ropes lowered, hands outstretched, she stepped back. "There's another way," she said. "Others deeper in. I can get them." They argued, shouted. Althea only smiled, tired and dark-eyed. "I got them this far, I'm not stopping now." The last anyone saw of her was that smile, framed by soot and flickering light, as she turned back into the smoke. A rescue team tried to re-enter 2 days later. The fire had cooled, but something else hadn't. Tunnels shifted, maps warped. They heard strange echoes, soft humming, rhythmic tapping. Some said it was pressure in the rock, others whispered her name. Althea was never recovered. The company closed the shaft, sealed it with concrete and signatures. Official cause of death, presumed. But the miners had another word for it: stayed. Some say she found a chamber that didn't burn, that the mine took her in, like a heart absorbs a needle too deep to dig out. That she walks the shafts even now, her steps light, her breath stolen, her shadow missing. Not a ghost, not quite. A kindness buried, but not gone. A guide in the dark for those who listen. And maybe, just maybe, still choosing. The deeper Eli moved into the belly of the mine, the less the map mattered. The passageways veered into unmarked hollows, split at angles no engineer would approve of. Some walls bled into others like melted wax, as if the mine had reshaped itself in grief. The air thinned by the yard. He could feel it in his chest, each breath slower, heavier, like dragging lungs through wet cotton. He paused where the tunnel curved unnaturally sharp, almost a full turn. His lantern cast long shadows behind him, shadows that didn't fade the way they should when he turned back. He knelt and ran his fingers along the stone near the bend. It was pocked with faint yellow streaks, the stone flaked and cratered. He touched one and winced. The surface was brittle, still warm. Sulfur. Not old, not fossil memory, but fresh. Hours old, maybe less. No fire burned now, but something had passed through, something hot enough to leave breath marks in stone. He pressed forward, the heat lingering on his skin even as the air around him grew colder. The mine had no consistent temperature anymore. One step could chill you, the next could make you sweat like a fever dream. The sound began as a vibration in his teeth, then a hum, low, persistent, but not mechanical, not the groan of timber or the strain of rock. It had cadence, a rise and fall, like voices. Too many to count, too soft to understand, layered over each other like a choir just beyond a closed door. Eli stopped walking. The humming didn't. He pulled the old map from his coat and turned it toward the lantern. No corridor matched the one he stood in. No shaft should have run this deep without reinforcement, yet the walls held bare, untouched by beam or brace. He folded the map and tucked it away. It wouldn't help him now. Ahead, the tunnel narrowed again. It forced him to duck. His shoulder brushed the wall and came away with something sticky. He brought his hand close to the light. Rust red. But too fresh to be rust. Then he saw it. A handprint, pressed flat into the stone at eye level. Palm out. Fingers splayed, glowing faintly, not from an outside source, but from within. A deep, ember-red glow that pulsed like a heartbeat slowed to near stillness. He raised the lantern and held it beside the mark. No heat radiated from it, no smell. But it vibrated faintly in the same rhythm as the hum, as though it was part of the chorus, as though the stone itself had begun to remember who touched it last. The print was small, narrow fingers, not a miner's hand. A woman's. Eli stared at it, not moving. Something about it refused to let him pass. Not by force, by memory. It felt like stepping through someone else's dream. One not meant for him. Behind him, the tunnel gave a sharp, dry creak. The kind of sound a noose makes, just before it tightens. He turned slowly. Nothing there. But the air had shifted. Not a breeze. Just a pressure. As though the mine had leaned in closer to listen. And it was waiting. The radio crackled like dry leaves underfoot. It came from the far corner of the tunnel, an old shaft phone bolted to a rotting timber post, the wire long since chewed through by rust and time. Eli had passed at least 4, like it since descending past the service levels, each one dead as bone. But this one hissed, soft, static-laced, alive. He approached cautiously, lantern held low, casting shadows that twitched at the edges of vision. The handset dangled from its cord, swaying slightly, though the air was still. He reached out and steadied it with one hand, listening to the hum of interference spill into the stone. Then came the voice. "You shouldn't have come, Eli." He froze. His name hung in the air like breath, turned solid. A woman's voice. Calm. Not pleading. Not hostile, something worse. Knowing. Eli hadn't spoken since he entered the tunnel. Hadn't uttered his name to anyone but the dark. That knowledge should have felt impossible. But it didn't. It felt personal. He brought the receiver to his ear, slow and careful. "Who are you?" he asked, but only silence answered. A deep, resonant kind that pressed into the bones. Not dead air, waiting air. The line clicked. Once, then went quiet. He lowered the handset and turned, heart steady but tight. Every instinct told him to retreat, but none of them knew where to. There was no up anymore, no map, no path. Just the weight of the mine, pressing in with the stubborn patience of the dead. Then the flame came back. Not his lantern, it still burned steady. But another light bloomed down the tunnel, around the bend. Flickering, unnatural. It pulsed in that same slow rhythm he'd felt in the handprint. Beat, beat. Pause. Beat, beat. Pause. Like a heart that had learned to mimic breath. The glow rolled along the walls like it belonged to something moving. Against the draft. That was what stopped him cold. Air in these tunnels always flowed outward. Fires had a rule. They chased oxygen. Heat ran uphill. But this light was pushing in toward him, carving through the natural pull like it didn't care about rules anymore. He stepped backward once, lantern held high. The flame in the distance didn't falter. It grew. Behind him, the shaft phone clicked again. Twice this time, Morse code, maybe. Or a signal from a memory pretending to be a machine. "You were always going to come," the voice said again, closer now. Not through the phone but in the very air itself. As though the walls had remembered her tone and were playing it back. "Just not for what you think." The light rounded the corner. Eli raised the lantern instinctively, but it did nothing to outshine the glow. Because now he could see a shape. Tall, still, draped in white. Her outline blurred at the edges, as if flame lived inside her rather than around her. Her feet didn't touch the ground. And she had no shadow. The tunnel widened without warning, as if the earth itself had pulled back in reverence. Stone gave way to a dome-shaped chamber, its walls smoothed by time, by heat, by hands maybe Eli couldn't tell. The ceiling vanished into blackness, but the light didn't need to climb that high. It came from the center. She stood alone on the chamber floor, framed in the quiet glow of flame cupped in her hand like it was something delicate. The fire didn't roar or flicker, it pulsed gently, a living thing. Her dress was white, untouched by the soot clinging to every other surface down here. Her face striking in a way that time never weathered held no hostility. Just the deep, aching stillness of someone who had waited too long and no longer expected anyone to arrive. Eli didn't speak. Not yet. Althea turned toward him without surprise, as if she'd known the moment he set foot in the mine, that he would eventually stand before her. Her eyes were dark coal, black, but not dead. They shimmered faintly, holding something behind them that was older than grief. "You've come far," she said. Her voice echoed with no source, no reverb from the walls. It simply existed not inside the chamber, but inside Eli's chest. He raised the lantern higher, but it felt small now. Childish, almost. Her flame, though quiet, cast more light than his could dream of. "You're Althea," he said, not a question. She nodded once. "They said you never came out." "I didn't." He stared, taking her in. The stories hadn't done her justice, not because they were wrong, but because they were incomplete. No one had told the part where her presence bent the air, where sorrow hummed like a tuning fork through the stone, where her shadow didn't follow her because it had left. "Why?" he asked, barely above a whisper. She tilted her head. "Because someone had to stay." Her fingers opened slightly, letting the flame in her palm rise, just a little. In the glow, he saw something within its shapes, maybe faces. Then one shape lingered. A face. Young, dirt-smeared. Eyes like Eli's but softer. "Jacob." Eli's breath caught. "He stayed," Althea said. "Not because he was trapped. Not in the way they thought. He stayed because he heard it too, the voice in the flame. The memory. The hunger. And he believed it could be guided, not fed." Eli took a step forward. "Is he alive?" "No, but not gone either. He became part of what I guard." The fire dimmed slightly. "What is it?" Eli asked. Her eyes lowered. "The mine is no longer just stone. It remembers, it listens. It took what we gave it, fear, hope, sacrifice, and shaped itself around those things. What's left down here isn't death." She looked up again. "It's choice." He swallowed hard. His feet felt heavy. "So what happens now?" "You can go. I won't stop you." Her voice was steady. "But the flame, the one he's part of, it doesn't follow. You leave him." Eli stared at her, the silence pressing in like a hand around his throat. "Would you leave if it meant abandoning the last trace of family? Or stay and face what they became?" Eli didn't move. Not when her voice faded. Not when the flame in her hand lowered again, casting longer shadows. Not even when the chamber itself seemed to draw breath through the cracks in the walls, as if the mine was listening to their silence. He stood firm, shoulders squared, feet sunk into the dust of the chamber floor. "I'm not leaving him," Eli said. The words came out dry, scraped raw from somewhere deeper than his lungs. His voice was steadier than he felt. Althea regarded him with neither approval nor sorrow, only the same impossible calm, like she'd seen this moment before. Her bare feet shifted just enough to close the distance between them. When she reached up, her fingers trembling ever so slightly, Eli didn't flinch. Her hand pressed gently to his brow. There was no flash, no surge, no heat. Just sight. The chamber vanished. He was inside something else now. Not a place, not a memory, a presence. He stood in a tunnel wider than any the miners had carved. Veins of molten gold lining the walls like arteries. Heat pulsed from the rock, not as fire but as intent. He could feel it, thinking slow and vast. The mine wasn't alive in the way animals were. It was something older. A witness that had grown curious about the things that scurried through it. Men had come seeking gold, left behind fear, sacrifice, grief. The mine had kept those like embers. It learned them. And in return, it gave something back. In the haze of glowing steam, Eli saw them. Dozens, maybe more. Bodies suspended in alcoves of crystal and ash. Not dead, at least not entirely. Their features flickered like candlelight caught in glass. Faces in half-remembered expressions, some peaceful, some twisted in the last moment of pain before surrender. They weren't trapped. They had become. fused into the rock not as prisoners but as fragments of memory, of will, of presence. He saw one turn slightly, eyes half-lidded. The motion was wrong, like watching a dream move underwater. Then he saw Jacob. His brother's face was thinner, older than the last time Eli had seen it. Cheekbones sharpened, lips parted as if mid-sentence. But the eyes were still his, not clouded, not blank. Aware. Watching. And when they met Eli's, something passed between them. Not a word, not an image. Just the feeling of recognition, then warmth. Not heat, not flame. Warmth. The kind you remember from the last time someone held your hand and meant it. Eli staggered back. The vision faded. The chamber returned. Althea lowered her hand. "Now you know," she said. Eli's chest heaved. His palms burned from where he'd clenched them into fists. He looked at her, not with fear, but with something harder. Acceptance, understanding. "You guard this. I try. They're not gone. No." Her voice was soft. "But they're no longer just themselves." He looked toward the passage behind her, now glowing faintly with that same ember hum. They wanted to stay. Some did. She looked at him. Some needed someone to choose it for them. Eli stepped forward again. This time, toward the flame. The tunnel opened behind Althea, glowing with that same deep, slow rhythm. The pulse of heat that wasn't just warmth but awareness. It wasn't light that poured from the passage. It was memory, thick and golden red, flowing like sap from a wound that would never heal. The air trembled with it, not just from temperature, from attention. Eli could feel it settle on his skin like breath. Not something blowing across him, but something breathing him in. The mind was watching. No listening. He turned toward Althea, whose flame had dimmed now, as though she no longer needed it to be seen. She stood not in front of the tunnel but beside it. Guardian, perhaps, or gate. "It was never just fire," she said, softly. "Not after the first." Eli nodded once. "It took them. It heard them," she corrected. "Their pain. Their fear, their promises." Every scream that echoed through these shafts sank into the stone, deeper than any drill ever reached. The earth held it. Held them. And when the heat rose again, it carried their voices with it. He glanced back toward the direction he came, though it felt like a world ago. "The others, the ones in the wall. They're not just dead." "No," she said. "They're not alive either, not in the way you know, but they're here." Remembered so completely the fire began to think in their shape. Eli stepped closer to the tunnel mouth, where the walls curved in, breathing slow and low like a beast that dreams in the dark. "And you?" "I stayed long enough," she said. "Long enough to stop burning. Long enough to listen back. It kept me as I was, so I could show others what waits." He looked at her, not with doubt, but with the hard clarity of a man weighing his last decision. "You want me to join them?" She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was not command, nor plea. It was choice. "I want you to understand. This mine holds something no map could chart. A truth too deep for the surface to carry. I can't leave. But you still can." She stepped toward him, eyes full of flickering shadows. "If you stay, you'll lose yourself. Slowly. Thought by thought. Until you're not one man anymore. You'll become part of the voice guiding others, warning them, remembering them." Her hand hovered near his chest, over the ledger tucked into his coat. "Or, you carry it out. The story, the proof. You take what this place has shown you and make it heard in town halls, over campfires, in the quiet spaces where fear keeps its secrets. But that path means leaving your brother behind." Eli's jaw clenched. The pulse from the tunnel deepened, vibrating in his bones. "You said he chose to stay." "He did, but he was waiting for someone to see him, one last time. The tunnel's heat rolled over him again, not burning, but thick with a weight he couldn't shake. Memory, grief, longing, all of it wrapped in a warmth that didn't want to hurt him. It wanted to know him. Two choices: step forward and dissolve into something greater, or turn back and carry the fire in his chest alone. Althea waited. And the mine held its breath. The first blast cracked through the morning like a thunderclap split too clean. Dust rose from the ridge in a jagged plume, curling skyward in slow motion, as if even the earth wasn't ready to let go. Above ground, the air was sharp and brittle, cold enough to sting, dry enough to carry every sound, boots in gravel, shouts over radios, the distant grind of winches hauling explosives into place. Men in high-vis vests and marked jackets moved with mechanical efficiency around the mouth of the mine. They didn't speak much. Orders had already been handed down. At the edge of the cordoned perimeter, a single figure stood apart, lean, dirt-smudged, and furious. Ruth Calder was young for her post, barely 30, but already known as the best damn terrain reader in 3 counties. She'd been hired by the county survey office to map the unstable lower levels, months before the mining company swooped in with urgent safety priorities. She'd warned them. The mine was shifting, breathing in ways no stable geological structure should. The tunnels were changing faster than maps could follow. But now her warnings were buried beneath paperwork and soon, under rock. "He's still down there," Ruth shouted, her voice cutting through the clamor. A man in a dark wool coat turned to her. White shirt, steel tie pin, clipped mustache, the kind of man who never took his gloves off, even when giving bad news. Malcolm Pike, head of regional operations, temporary, yet godlike. "I already told you, Miss Calder," he said, voice smooth as gravel polished by rain. "We have no record of a man named Eli Granger being granted entry. If someone trespassed into a sealed zone, the liability falls to him, not us." Ruth stepped forward, teeth clenched. "I saw him. Yesterday morning. He bought a map from old Denny. He had a lantern, gear he knew what he was doing." Pike gave a tired smile, the kind that only moved half his face. "A lot of men know what they're doing until they vanish, or make things worse. We're not going to risk lives for ghost chasers and broken compasses." She looked past him to the demolition crew. The final charge was already being set into the rock face. Just beneath the last functional shaft, the one Eli had used. "They'll seal him in." "That's the idea," Pike replied. Ruth shook her head. "You don't understand. Something's wrong with that mine. It's not just unstable, it's changing people. The air, the layout, it doesn't follow natural shifts. He's not chasing ore, he went in to find his brother." Pike's expression didn't change, but his eyes grew colder. "You've been working too many double shifts. Go home. Write your report." She opened her mouth to argue again, but the signal flare went up. A long whistle blew. "Clear the line," barked one of the engineers. Ruth stepped back, her fists trembling. They were going to do it. Bury him. Bury whatever truth he'd found down there. The second blast rolled over the valley like thunder caught in stone. Birds scattered from the trees. The entrance collapsed inward, swallowing itself in a cloud of ash and gravel. A silence followed, dense, unnatural. Pike dusted his coat sleeves, satisfied. "For public safety," he said. But Ruth didn't look away. Because somewhere in the back of her mind, something was still humming. Like the mine wasn't done speaking yet. The light inside the chamber had dimmed, but the warmth remained thick and enveloping. As though the mine itself had drawn closer to listen to Eli's silence. He stood on the edge of something both immense and intimate, heart pounding with the kind of certainty that only comes when there are no more questions left to ask. Althea, still and solemn, stepped forward one final time. In her hands, she held something small. It glowed with a faint internal light, amber red with veins of dark, like coal laced with molten threads. Not a gem, not a tool. It looked almost alive, like a coal that had once been something softer, something with memory. As she raised it to Eli, he could see what had been burned into its center, 2 initials, curled faintly in white-hot script beneath the surface. JG. This is all he could carry back, she said quietly. Eli took it. The moment his fingers closed around the stone, a heat ran up his arm, not painful, but invasive. Not just warmth, but presence. His brothers. He staggered slightly as images surged through his mind. Not visions. Feelings. The cold steel of the minecart under Jacob's palms. The pressure of the ceiling coming down, then the silence after. The humming. The fire that came not to burn, but to offer. And Jacob, whispering into the dark. If someone finds this, let them know I stayed because I chose to. Eli blinked hard. The ember pulsed in his hand, steady and alive. A relic not just of body, but of will. When he looked up, Althea had already begun to step back. The edges of her form blurred like mist drawn toward heat. Her white dress rippled, not with movement, but with disintegration, each thread unspooling into flame that didn't rise, but curled inward, back into the stone. Her face remained until the last a calm expression, not smiling, not sorrowful, just knowing. You were meant to carry it, she said. Her voice came not from her mouth, but from everywhere. From the walls, from the ember. Tell them we were not lost, only transformed. Then she was gone. Just like that. The mine exhaled. The pulse shifted. Where once the chambers had felt cradling, now they tightened. A low rumble echoed through the deep. At first, distant like thunder over hills, then closer. Sharper, more immediate. The tunnels were collapsing. The path he came from shook with a rain of pebbles. Veins of gold in the rock flared, then cracked. The mine, in all its sentient slowness, was folding in on itself like a story reaching its end. Eli turned, gripping the ember tight in one hand, lantern in the other. No time for reverence now. Only movement. The floor tilted beneath his boots, angles slanting where there had been flatness. The very shape of the mine was turning inside out. Behind him, the chamber closed, sealing Althea's final trace in heat and dust. Ahead, the path narrowed into one sliver of escape. He ran. And in his chest, the ember stayed warm, guiding him not with light, but memory. The tunnels screamed around him. Not with voices, but with movement, grinding stone, collapsing timber, the groan of ancient supports giving way after decades of holding secrets. Eli's lungs burned with every breath, each one drawn through smoke and dust and the invisible weight of memory pressing in on all sides. The mine wasn't falling apart, it was closing, reshaping, choosing what to keep and what to let go. He staggered forward through a narrow corridor that hadn't been there before. The walls slick with condensation and soot, the air so hot it shimmered. His fingers scraped raw against the rock as he pulled himself through gaps just wide enough for his shoulders. Somewhere behind him, a chamber caved in, with a shudder like thunder in a coffin. Pebbles rained from above. The ember in his palm pulsed once urgent. Still warm. He coughed hard, blood flecking his lips. The lantern was gone, lost 2 bends ago, but the ember glowed enough to see. He held it close, guiding his steps through the dark, as if it remembered the way better than he did. The climb grew steeper. He reached a jagged incline, where rusted rail ties jutted out like broken teeth. He grabbed one, then another, hauling himself up hand over hand. His knuckles split against the rust. His knees found only rock. The stone beneath him vibrated, a warning. Another ledge higher now. He reached for it. It crumbled the moment he touched it. He slipped. The fall wasn't far, but it was enough to jar his spine, knock the breath from his chest, and send the ember skittering across the stone. No, he gasped, scrambling after it. He found it resting against a cracked beam, still glowing, still warm, still humming faintly, like a voice half singing a lullaby it barely remembered. He closed his fingers around it, tighter this time, and turned to try again. One more climb, one more push. This time, the stone held. Barely. He pulled himself up, inch by inch, muscle by scream. The tunnel was collapsing behind him in pulses, as if the mine was exhaling in stages. Every few seconds, a new shudder, a cough of dust, a ceiling groan. The light at the end wasn't sunlight, it was lantern glow, pale and flickering, and a silhouette framed in it. Eli. The voice was sharp, young, impossible. Ruth called her. He barely had the strength to process it. One more handhold, one more pull. The last ledge gave under his grip just as he reached the opening. And a hand caught his wrist. Fingers locked around his arm with strength he didn't expect. He looked up through blurred eyes and saw her face smeared with soot, eyes wide, terrified. "I've got you," she shouted. Then she pulled. He half tumbled, half crawled out of the shaft, the tunnel behind him collapsing inward in a roar of finality. Dust burst into the open air in a wave, coating them both as they lay on the slope, gasping. Ruth stared at him. "They said you were gone." "I nearly was," he rasped, holding out his hand. The ember flickered in his palm, alive, steady, undeniable. "But he's not." The town hall smelled of dust and old paper, the kind of place where voices tended to echo more than they should. Its wooden rafters groaned in the wind, and the windows were clouded with grime that no one had bothered to scrub in years. It had been years since anyone gathered here for anything real. Now the room was full: miners, foremen, bartenders, widows, surveyors, the preacher, the sheriff. Faces Eli didn't recognize anymore, not really. Time had changed them, or maybe the mine had changed him. He stood near the front table, soot-streaked and hollow-eyed, one hand resting on a small cloth bundle. His knuckles were still scabbed from the climb, and his breathing carried the rough edge of smoke. They all watched him, some with skepticism, others with a quiet kind of dread, like they already knew what he was going to say and were hoping to be wrong. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he unwrapped the cloth. The ember glowed faintly in the cold air, its core pulsing with slow light, deep orange with veins of black and gold threading through it like roots. Beside it, he placed the burned ledger. The room stirred. Chairs creaked. Someone near the back whispered a prayer under their breath. "This came from Shaft 9, Eli said at last. "There were survivors, once." He let that hang, watching their expressions flicker. "Not alive, not how we'd think, but they're there, changed, chosen, part of something older than us, older than this whole town." Pike, the mining executive, leaned forward with the polite disdain of a man cornered by things he couldn't quantify. "You're asking us to believe a rock talks, Mr. Granger." Eli met his eyes. "I'm not asking, I'm telling." Someone else scoffed. "How do we know it's not just slag from a burn pocket? We've all seen weird formations." Eli held up the ember. "Check the core." Several people leaned in, squinting at the initials burned into the center. "J.G." The murmuring grew louder. "That's your brother, isn't it?" an old woman asked. Eli nodded once. It's all he could carry back. The room quieted. Still, it wasn't enough. Not for the skeptical. Not for those who'd buried too much to allow hope. Then, from the back, a thin voice spoke up. "I saw her too." Heads turned. It was the boy from the derelict camp. No one had noticed him enter, but there he stood, clothes still dusted with ash, eyes too old for his age. "She spared me," he said. "I looked away when the fire came. I didn't run. She just let me go." Someone muttered, "You shouldn't be here, kid." But no one stopped him, because there was something in his voice, flat, unshaken, that held the room tighter than any threat could. The preacher spoke next. He was quiet, leaning on his cane, his gaze fixed on the ember. "If she guards," he said slowly, "maybe it ain't hell down there." A stillness settled. Not peace, not yet. But possibility. And for Hollow's End, that was more dangerous than any fire. The meeting reconvened 2 days later in the same hall, but something had shifted. The room was colder this time, the benches filled with stiffer backs and tighter expressions. No longer awe or fear. Now there was something else in the air. Division. The kind that builds behind closed doors and mutters over coffee. That ember had stirred something they couldn't ignore. And that was always the most dangerous thing a man could do in Hollow's End, make people feel. The wooden floor creaked beneath boots and spurred heels. A makeshift sign outside read, "Town Assembly, Shaft 9 Preservation Vote." It looked hastily painted, like whoever made it didn't expect the town to still be around for another. Eli stood near the front again, not in front of the crowd, but to the side. He hadn't rehearsed anything. He didn't bring notes. The ember was wrapped in cloth in his hand, still warm, but quieter than before, as if even it was waiting. On the dais, 3 town officials sat with furrowed brows and pursed lips. Behind them, Pike, his polished shoes catching what little light filtered in through the window grime, stood with arms folded, jaw clenched like a man who had already written the ending in his head and was just waiting for everyone else to catch up. Sheriff Albright cleared his throat. "The matter's simple," he said, voice loud but not unkind. "We vote, we dig, or we don't." Someone in the back shouted, "And starve, or we don't." Murmurs followed. The town wasn't rich, it barely held together. Tourism had dried up, and ore was still the closest thing Hollow's End had to a god left. The idea of letting all that potential sit, buried it, itched at people's pride. Their hunger. Pike stepped forward. "There's gold under there. Rich veins untouched since the fire. If we drill with new precautions, reroute around the unstable zones." Eli stepped forward and placed the cloth on the center table. He didn't say a word. He just unwrapped it. The ember sat there, glowing dim and steady. Its light was softer than it had been in the mine, but something about it still filled the room, casting warped shadows against the paneling. The initials, J, G, were clear now, unmistakable, a name remembered in fire. The crowd fell into a hush. Then, the ember pulsed. Once. Bright. Full. And then went dark. Not dimmed. Not flickered. Extinguished. A gasp broke out somewhere near the middle row. People leaned forward. Pike froze, blinking. Eli stepped back. The silence was total. A final heartbeat. Then Sheriff Albright spoke again, more quietly now. "We'll call the vote." One by one, voices answered. "Preserve. Preserve. Preserve." A few dissenters. Not many. It wasn't unanimous. But it was enough. No applause followed, no cheers. Just the quiet sound of chairs scraping as people stood, thoughtful, unsettled, like they'd just survived something they didn't yet understand. Eli picked up the now cold stone, held it once more in his hand. It felt lighter now. Not empty, but finished. They sealed the mine with more than concrete. When the final stone was laid, it wasn't by engineers or suits in polished shoes, it was the town's own. Miners who remembered the blast. Sons of men who never came home. Widows who still set a second plate at dinner out of habit. It was slow work, deliberate, no explosives, no ceremony. Just hands and shovels and the kind of silence you earn through shared understanding. A plaque was mounted into the rock face before the final pour. Simple, cast iron, dark as coal, with letters etched deep enough to outlast the weather. "In memory of the lost and the woman who chose to stay." No names, no dates, just that. The shaft was left untouched for the rest of that day. People came and went without speaking. Some laid stones, Others pressed their palms to the plaque and walked away with tears that didn't belong to just them. Ruth Calder stood the longest. She had been the last to see him before the tunnel gave up its hold. She didn't speak of what happened that day, not even in her reports. Eli Granger disappeared from town life soon after. Not dramatically, no train ticket, no farewell speech at the tavern. Just quiet absence. A rented room left clean. A coffee cup never refilled. But those who paid attention saw him on the ridge, sometimes, near the tree line, watching the valley. He'd moved into an old hunting cabin, a few miles beyond the town's edge, half rotted and quiet. He spent most mornings with his hands in the soil, growing things that didn't have to dig too deep to survive. Potatoes, beans, lavender. He cut his own firewood, took long walks. Didn't ask for company, but didn't turn it away either. On the nightstand beside his bed, the ember sat nestled in a dish of river stones. It never glowed again. Not even when the wind howled. Not even when the earth trembled with distant shifts. The veins in its center dulled, the initials fading slightly each year like frost melting from glass. But it stayed warm. Not hot, not fiery. Warm. Like breath against your cheek. Like a memory that refuses to leave. Sometimes Eli would sit beside it in the early hours before dawn and rest his fingers on its surface. Not to feel connected, not to summon ghosts, but because that heat reminded him that some things some people didn't need saving. They needed to remain. He never returned to the mine. Never needed to. He carried it with him now, not the weight of the place, but the choice. To remember. To keep the fire quietly lit. And in Hollow's End, the wind blew softer across the valley. Not because the danger was gone, but because mercy, once buried, had been given a name. And it had chosen to stay. Some nights, when the fog hangs low and the wind slips quiet through Hollow's End, a thin ribbon of smoke can be seen curling up from the sealed shaft. Not the black kind that comes from burning wood or damp coal. No, this smoke is different, faint, blue as river mist, and too cold to steam. It drifts upward in slow spirals, vanishing before it touches sky. Not enough to set off alarms. Just enough to make you wonder if the mountain is exhaling. Locals don't talk about it. Not directly. At the bar, they'll tell you the mine's long dead, choked shut, and sealed under law and memory. They'll laugh off the stories, mock the tourists who still show up trying to film ghost footage or sell podcast episodes. But ask them again, just once, when the room's gone still and the lights flicker with wind, and you might get a different answer. They'll say, sometimes, mercy doesn't leave a grave, sometimes, it waits. Some swear they've seen a figure through the tree line. A flicker of white between the branches, like a woman's dress swaying just beyond the edge of sight. Others say they've heard a voice not speaking, exactly, but humming, soft, low. Like something meant to calm a child, or lull a fire to sleep. There's no official record of anyone entering the mine since Eli Granger came back. No one has dared. But every once in a while, someone hikes out that way. A friend, a sibling. Someone with a face they haven't stopped dreaming about. They walk up to the old barricade. They stand in silence, and sometimes, just before they leave, they say a name. The shaft never answers. But the smoke blue and slow and impossible rises just a little thicker the next night. Back in Eli's cabin, the ember still rests on his nightstand. Cold now, darker than before, like a coal too old to remember the flame it once held. But he doesn't move it, doesn't bury it. Because warmth isn't always about heat. Sometimes, it's about presence. Sometimes, it's enough to know a thing was that it mattered, that it chose. So now the question hangs in the air, like the smoke itself, thin, quiet, and patient. Would you go down there? If someone you loved was still waiting? If you could feel the echo of their voice in the stone? Would you descend into the dark, not to rescue them, but to remember them? Would you trade certainty for memory? Safety for closeness? Light for the flicker of something almost like hope? Not every fire dies in ash. Some stay buried. Some burn inward. And some just wait. So what would you do? If the blue smoke rose for you,